The cold came first. It bit through Dale's torn jacket before he even opened his eyes. When he did, all he saw was smoke, twisted metal, and a sky the color of a bruise. The transport had gone down somewhere in the middle of the night, torn apart by ground fire before anyone had a chance to strap in properly. He did not know how far he had been thrown. He did not know if anyone else had made it. He sat up slowly. His left side screamed at him. 2 ribs, maybe 3. He pressed a hand against them and breathed through his teeth until the worst of it passed. Dale was a lance corporal in the 14th Human Expeditionary Unit, one of the smallest and least regarded forces in the entire galactic coalition. Humanity had only been accepted into the coalition 11 years ago, and only barely. The older species had made it clear from the start that humans were tolerated, not welcomed, too emotional, too unpredictable, too young. He had been on this frontier moon for 6 weeks. It was supposed to be a routine escort assignment. He pulled himself to his feet and looked around. The transport had broken apart across a rocky hillside. Most of it was burning. He could see no movement, no signs of survivors, and no sign of the enemy either. Whatever had shot them down had moved on. Dale limped through the wreckage looking for a medkit, a radio, anything useful. He found a cracked emergency crate near the rear section of the hull, its contents mostly destroyed by the impact. Inside, beneath a layer of shattered insulation foam, was something he did not expect. An egg. It was large, roughly the size of a human torso, dark green with faint gold lines running across its surface like veins. It was warm to the touch, which surprised him given the freezing air. One side had a thin crack running along it, and he could see a faint pulse of light from within, slow and dim. Dale had no idea what kind of egg it was. He had heard stories about a reptilian species called the Vreeth, an old and proud race that bonded their young to the great noble houses of the galaxy as living symbols of alliance and power. He had never seen one of their creatures in person. Nobody in his unit had. He almost left it there. Then the temperature dropped another degree, and the light inside the egg flickered. Dale was not a man who thought in terms of politics or symbolism. He was a man who had grown up on a cold planet, who had learned early that small things died quickly when left alone in the dark. He picked up the egg, wrapped it in the one dry jacket he found in the debris, and carried it back to the most sheltered corner of the wreckage he could find. He built a small fire from broken panels and dry insulation. He sat with the egg between his knees and his back against the hull, and he stayed awake most of the night, feeding the fire, listening for enemy patrols, watching that faint golden glow pulse slowly inside the shell. Somewhere near dawn, the cracking sound woke him from a light doze. The egg was splitting open, not violently, not dramatically, just slowly, steadily, the shell peeling apart in thin, curved pieces like the rind of a fruit. Dale sat very still and watched. What came out was small, much smaller than he had expected. It was covered in a thin membrane that it tore through with tiny claws, shaking and shivering and making a sound somewhere between a chirp and a hiss. Its scales were dark green, almost black in the low firelight, and its eyes, when it finally opened them, were a deep amber gold. It looked up at Dale. Dale looked back at it. The hatchling blinked once. Then it crawled across the jacket, over his knee, and pressed its whole small body against his wounded side, as if it knew exactly where the heat was and exactly where he hurt. It made a low, steady sound that was almost like a purr and tucked its head under his arm. Dale sat there for a long moment without moving. He had no idea what had just happened in terms of Vreeth biology or ancient bonding customs or galactic law. He did not know that what the hatchling had done in that moment was irreversible, that it had looked into his face and made a choice that would define the rest of its life. He did not know any of that yet. All he knew was that it was alive and small and warm, and that it had chosen to be close to him. He adjusted his arm so it was not crushing the creature. He fed a little more fuel to the fire. He kept watch on the dark sky above and the rocky ground below, the same way he would have watched over any living thing left in his care. He did not name it yet. That would come later. For now, he just kept it warm. Outside, the frontier moon was silent and cold and enormously indifferent to both of them. But inside that broken corner of wreckage, with a small fire burning and a dragon hatchling breathing steadily against his ribs, Dale felt, for the first time in weeks, like something had gone right. He did not know yet how much it was going to cost them both. The rescue team found Dale on the third day. They came down in a coalition shuttle, a mixed crew of aliens and 2 other humans from a separate unit. Dale was sitting outside the wreckage eating a ration bar, and the hatchling was draped across his shoulders like a scarf, watching the shuttle with bright amber eyes. The coalition officer who stepped out first was a Duarathi, tall and grey-skinned, with 4 narrow fingers on each hand. His name was Commander Oral, and he stopped walking the moment he saw the young dragon. Then he kept walking faster. "Where did you get that?" he said. "Found it in the wreckage," Dale said. "Egg was in a cargo crate. It hatched." Oral stared at the hatchling. The hatchling stared back without blinking. "That is a Vreeth youngling," Oral said slowly, as if speaking to someone of very limited intelligence. "It was a diplomatic gift from House Vaic to Lord Sound of the Third Reach. Do you understand what that means?" "Not entirely," Dale said. Oral turned to the rest of the crew and spoke in his native language. There were some sharp responses. Someone said a word Dale did not know but understood from context was not a compliment toward humans. The situation was explained to Dale over the next hour in pieces with poorly hidden irritation. The Vreeth were an ancient species. Their hatchlings were precious and rare. When a Vreeth egg hatched, the young dragon imprinted on the first living being it saw and bonded to them completely. This bond was not symbolic. It was biological, deep, and permanent. A Vreeth that had bonded could not simply be handed to someone else. Attempting to force separation caused the dragon severe distress, and sustained forced separation could kill it. Lord Sound's representative, a sharp-faced alien named Garrett, who had been waiting anxiously at the Coalition outpost, arrived by a second shuttle the following afternoon. He looked at Dale and the hatchling for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "Take it off the human." 2 of his attendants approached. The hatchling was quiet and still until one of them reached out to lift it. Then it moved, not slowly. It twisted, hissed a sound that filled the whole room, pressed all 4 feet against Dale's chest, and dug its claws in hard enough to tear fabric. The sound it made was not aggression. It was raw panic. It began to shake. Dale put his hand on its back. "Hey, easy." The shaking slowed. Garrett watched this with an expression Dale could not read. Oral watched it with an expression Dale could read very well. It was embarrassment. "The bond has formed," one of Garrett's attendants said quietly. "If we force this, it will harm itself." There was a long, uncomfortable silence. In the end, there was nothing to be done. Vreeth law was clear. A bond was a bond. Forcing it apart was not only cruel but illegal under Coalition Charter, and even Garrett, furious as he was, could not override that without causing a much larger political problem. The hatchling had chosen. That was the word everyone kept using. Chosen, as if it were an accusation. Dale was formally informed that the hatchling was his responsibility. He was given a thin document detailing Vreeth care requirements. He was also given to understand, in several different ways over the following days, that this was an embarrassment, that a Vreeth bonded to a human soldier rather than a noble lord was an insult to the dignity of the Vreeth gift tradition, and that his continued possession of the dragon would be watched and questioned at every opportunity. He did not particularly care about any of that. He cared that the hatchling needed food every few hours and that it had a preference for warm sleeping spots. He cared that it was growing already, slightly larger each morning, and that it had started following his hand signals without being taught. He cared that when he spoke to it, it listened with an attention that most humans would not bother to give. He named it Scout, not a grand name, not a Vreeth title full of old syllables and ancestral significance. Just Scout, because it was always watching, always oriented toward him, always alert to whatever he was alert to. Scout took to the name immediately. The other soldiers in Dale's reconstituted unit were cautious at first, then curious, then quietly delighted. A dragon, even a small one, was impossible not to watch. Scout had none of the aloofness or ceremony that the alien species associated with Vreeth. Around Dale's unit, it was present, responsive, occasionally playful. It learned fast. It remembered faces. Within 2 weeks, it had a clear understanding of who belonged near Dale and who did not. There was one person Scout did not like. His name was Colonel Bryn, a Duarathi officer attached to the coalition command structure. He was the one who had used the phrase diplomatic embarrassment most often in the official reports. He had also, Dale later learned, begun filing requests to have Dale reassigned somewhere inconvenient, away from the main force, somewhere quiet and dangerous and hard to come back from. Scout watched Colonel Bryn every time he came near. Flat amber eyes, perfectly still, tracking every move. Dale noticed. He stored it away and said nothing. He had learned a long time ago that the most dangerous threats were the ones that smiled while they worked. Scout, it turned out, had learned the same thing on its own. 4 months after the crash, Scout no longer fit under Dale's jacket. The Vreeth grew fast in their first year, faster if the bond they carried was strong. Scout had gone from the size of a house cat to something roughly the size of a large dog, all lean muscle and dark overlapping scales that caught light differently depending on the angle. Its wings were still too small to carry it fully, but they were developing, stretching wider each week, and its claws had grown long enough to score deep lines in metal without effort. The coalition outpost on the frontier moon had grown too, another 2 human units stationed there alongside 3 alien contingents. Dale's unit was still the smallest, still the least regarded, still given the patrol routes nobody else wanted. But they were good at those routes, and gradually even the alien soldiers stopped pretending not to notice. Scout was part of the reason. When Dale walked a perimeter, Scout walked it with him. It had developed the habit of ranging slightly ahead, low to the ground, reading the air with its tongue in short, rapid flicks. 3 times in 4 months it had stopped, gone still, and looked in a specific direction, and 3 times there had been something worth stopping for. Once, enemy scouts. Once, a collapsed sensor relay about to fail. Once, a pocket of toxic gas venting from a cracked geological seam. The alien soldiers stopped calling it the human's pet somewhere around the 2nd month. By the 3rd month, some of them had started calling it by name. Dale had been watching Scout train itself. That was the only word for it. Nobody taught the hatchling how to move quietly or how to position itself between Dale and an uncertain direction. Nobody taught it to sleep lightly or to be still when stillness was needed. It learned by watching. It retained everything. Vreeth biology, the basic literature said, was built for partnership. What the bonded companion did, the hatchling absorbed and adapted. Dale was a careful, patient soldier. Scout became a careful, patient dragon. What the literature had not prepared anyone for was the speed of Scout's growth relative to the strength of the bond. Vreeth experts who were consulted remotely kept revising their projections upward. A dragon bonded to a noble household grew at a measured, predictable rate. Scout was consistently ahead of every timeline, stronger sooner, more aware sooner, its scales harder and its reflexes sharper than any hatchling of equivalent age on record. Colonel Bryn noted this in his reports with language that was technically neutral and practically a complaint. Bryn had not succeeded in getting Dale reassigned. 3 separate requests had been quietly buried by Captain Reyes, Dale's commanding officer, a compact and precise woman who had a talent for losing paperwork she did not like. But Bryn was patient, and he had more influence than Reyes, and everyone in the unit knew the requests would keep coming. Dale focused on what he could control. That focus was tested in the 5th month, when a training exercise involving live munitions went wrong. An alien soldier from the Duarathi contingent, moving through a marked corridor, triggered a charge that had not been properly cleared. The explosion was contained but loud, and it threw debris across a wide radius. Dale was 40 feet away. A chunk of panel caught him in the back and knocked him forward off his feet. He hit the ground and rolled, which was reflex, and came up on one knee, which was training, and then there was a shadow over him, which was Scout. The hatchling had crossed the distance in the time it took Dale to get his breath back. It stood over him, wings half spread, facing the direction the debris had come from. It was not moving. It was not making a sound. It was simply between Dale and whatever might come next, every muscle locked, scales fanned slightly to make itself broader. Around them, the exercise ground had gone quiet. Dale put his hand on Scout's flank. "Stand down, I'm fine." Scout held the position for another full second. Then it lowered its wings, turned its head, and pressed its nose briefly against Dale's shoulder before stepping back to his left side. It was such a deliberate, controlled response that the nearest cluster of alien soldiers stood looking at it for a long moment without speaking. One of them, a Jurassic Lance sergeant named Von, who had been among the most vocal critics of the human-bonded dragon arrangement, said something quietly in his own language. Dale did not speak Jurassic well, but he caught the root word. It meant worth, not as in value, as in something that had earned something, something that had demonstrated what it was made of. Dale filed that away the same way he filed away everything useful. Bryn's fourth reassignment request arrived the following week. It was more specific this time. Dale was recommended for a long-range survey post 3 systems away, a solo posting, a tour of 8 months minimum. Scout could not accompany him there. Coalition regulations restricted living bonded Vreeth to active military zones. Captain Reyes called Dale into her office and showed him the document. "He's going to keep trying," she said. "I know," Dale said. "Something bigger is coming," she said. "The border incidents are escalating. Intel is suggesting a coordinated push. If that happens, a lot of these political games stop mattering." Dale looked out the narrow window. Scout was visible outside, sitting in the weak sun, watching the sky. "Or they get worse," he said. Reyes did not argue with that. Neither of them said what both of them were thinking, that in a big enough fight, inconvenient soldiers and their dragons could be aimed at things and not expected to come back. Scout turned its head and looked directly at the window where Dale stood. Even through the glass, the amber eyes were steady and clear. The invasion did not announce itself, it simply arrived. 6 weeks after Reyes' warning, 17 enemy warships crossed the frontier boundary simultaneously and began hitting coalition positions across a broad arc of the contested zone. The attacks were coordinated. The timing was tight enough to prevent any single outpost from warning another before the strikes hit. It was not the behavior of a raiding force. It was the opening of a campaign. At the Frontier Moon outpost, the alert came through garbled and partial at 3 in the local morning. Dale was already awake. Scout had been restless for 2 hours before the signal arrived, packing in a slow circle outside the barracks door, looking east where there was nothing visible to look at. By the time the sirens went, Dale had his gear on and his rifle in hand. He had learned to trust the restlessness. The enemy, a species called the Hurek, were known for ground assault following orbital pressure. They did not land troops cleanly. They dropped them in fast, in numbers, and let them spread before anyone could organize a response. The first Hurek units hit the western perimeter of the outpost before the coalition forces had fully reached their defensive positions. What followed was not a battle so much as a running emergency. 3 hours of noise and chaos and close-range contact in the dark. Small units of mixed coalition soldiers holding buildings and corridors and narrow passages against a force that was larger and faster and very good at pushing through confusion. Scout was not small anymore. In those 3 hours, the dragon went through walls that were faster to go through than around. It went low when the ceiling was low and fast when speed was what was needed, and it understood without being told the difference between a target and a friendly, a distinction that in the dark and the smoke was not always obvious to the humans and aliens fighting alongside it. It did not waste motion. It did not panic. When a Hurek unit cut off the 3rd Squad's exit route and they were 2 minutes from being overrun, it was Scout who went through the building from the outside, tore the exit obstruction apart from above, and held the gap open while 11 soldiers ran through it. The alien forces noticed. They had been told officially that the Vreeth hatchling was a diplomatic problem, a misallocation, something attached to the human contingent by an accident of circumstance. What they saw in the night fighting was a different thing entirely. They saw a dragon that had chosen its ground and would not be moved from it, that treated the humans around it not as a lesser charge, but as its own, as something worth burning for. Von, the Jurathi sergeant, fought 20 feet from Dale for most of the night and said afterward that he had seen old Vreeth war footage, formal bond battles from the historical record, and that what Scout did bore no resemblance to it. It was not ceremonial. It was not restrained. It was the most singularly focused defensive action he had ever witnessed by any bonded creature. Colonel Bryn was not present for the night fighting. He had been at the secondary command post on the other side of the outpost, which had seen little contact. In the morning, when the Hurek pushed back to regroup and the outpost took inventory of who was still standing, Bryn's absence from the hardest fighting was noted by everyone and mentioned by no one, which was its own kind of commentary. The battle assessments that came from Coalition High Command over the next several days carried a different tone toward Dale's unit. Not warm, exactly, but specific. The 14th Human Expeditionary Unit was cited by name in 2 operational summaries. Scout was described as a notable asset. This was, in Coalition military language, extraordinarily high praise. Bryn filed no new reassignment requests that week, but he attended every command briefing and asked careful questions about upcoming operations, and Dale watched him from across rooms the way Scout watched him from across corridors. The intelligence that arrived at the end of the week was not good. The Hurek were not retreating, they were massing. Their target, the analysis suggested, was the frontier moon itself, specifically its communication relay network, which served as the backbone for coalition coordination across the entire border region. If the relays went down, 6 separate defensive lines would be fighting blind. The Hurek knew this. The attack was coming within days. The key to the relay network was a narrow pass on the eastern edge of the moon, where 3 relay towers sat on high ground. If the Hurek took that pass, the towers fell. If the towers fell, everything else became much harder. Reyes laid it out in the briefing room with a flat map and a steady voice. We need a unit to hold the pass, small enough to move fast, capable enough to hold until the fleet repositions and sends support. Timeline is approximately 6 to 8 hours. Dale raised his hand. The 14th will do it. Around him, his unit said nothing against it. Bryn said, very carefully, there are more experienced units available. Reyes looked at him for a moment. The 14th is the best fit, she said. They know that terrain. Dale's unit began pulling supplies and ammunition. Scout stood at the doorway of the briefing room when the meeting ended and watched Bryn walk away down the corridor. Its tail was still. Its eyes were not. Dale touched its shoulder as he passed. Come on, he said. We've got work to do. Scout turned from the corridor and followed him without looking back. Neither of them slept that night. The pass was a narrow cut through dark rock, maybe 60 meters wide at its broadest point. The 3 relay towers stood on the high ridge above it, humming steadily, their signal lights blinking at regular intervals. The 14th arrived 2 hours before the Hurek did and used every minute of it. They rigged the choke point. They placed what explosives they had at 3 separate narrowings along the pass floor. They found the best elevated positions on the rock faces to either side and assigned 2 soldiers each. They identified their fallback points and their fallback after the fallback, because Dale believed in planning for when plans broke. Scout walked every inch of the ground with him, reading the air, memorizing the terrain. When the Hurek came, they came in numbers. The first wave hit the outer perimeter of the pass and found it defended. That surprised them, which brought the 14th 2 full minutes of advantage. They used it. The first set of charges brought rock down on the pass floor and choked the advance to a crawl. The soldiers on the rock faces opened fire with everything they had and forced the Hurek to compress into a tighter column to push forward. Scout moved along the ridge above the fighting, picking positions, not reckless but deliberate. It was larger now than it had been even 2 months ago, heavy with muscle, its wings wide enough to cross the pass in a single glide. It did not glide. It kept to the rock, used the height, and when Hurek soldiers tried to scale the eastern face to flank the unit's elevated positions, Scout was already there. It went through the climbing party with the kind of efficiency that came from 4 months of watching Dale work. The second wave was larger. Dale's unit was on the back of the first fallback position by then. They had lost 2 soldiers wounded, 1 seriously, and ammunition was running down faster than he had wanted. He got on the comm and requested the status of Coalition fleet repositioning. The response that came back was not from Fleet Command. It was from Bryn. He was at the secondary communication post, the same one he had used during the first battle, and he informed Dale, in very calm language, that there had been a routing change in the communication protocol, that fleet repositioning had been delayed due to a priority reassessment at the command level, and that the 14th should hold their position and continue the mission. Dale looked at the comm unit for a moment. Then he looked at Von, who had come with a small Duarathi reinforcement element and had heard the exchange. Von said nothing. His expression said everything. The routing change was real. Someone at command level had authorized it. It had delayed the fleet by at least 4 hours. Whether that was Bryn's hand alone or a coalition political move using the crisis to manage the human problem did not matter at this moment. What mattered was that the 14th had to hold the pass for 4 hours longer than expected with the forces they had and no additional support. Dale got back on the unit channel. He told his people the timeline had changed. He told them they were holding. He did not tell them he was not sure they could. Scout heard his voice and came down off the ridge to his position, low and fast, tucking in beside him. The third wave was the worst. The Hurek had brought heavier equipment forward. A mounted weapon began cutting across the rock face, forcing the elevated positions to retreat or die. The fallback became a scramble. 2 more soldiers went down, one of them hard. Dale was moving between positions, pulling people back, making the new line work, when the mounted weapon swung toward him. Scout hit it from above. The impact was massive. Scout took the weapon off its mount and crushed the crew position in a single strike, but the weapon discharged as it broke, and the discharge caught Scout across the left flank. The sound Scout made was not a hiss this time. It was deep and rough, and Dale heard it from 20 meters away and ran. Scout was on its feet. The wound was severe, a burn that had gone through scale and into muscle, scoring a long line from shoulder to hip. It stood anyway. It breathed in short, controlled bursts, and it stood. "Get down," Dale said. Scout looked at him with amber eyes and did not move. The Hurek pushed again. The line was barely holding. 3 soldiers were down. The rest were fighting with whatever they had. Dale kept Scout behind him as long as he could, kept pushing forward to keep the fighting away from the wounded, kept the line together by being the point of it. The 4th wave started, and Dale took a hit, not from a weapon. A Hurek soldier tackled him from the side when he was moving between 2 positions, and they went down together. Dale won that fight, but took a blade across the lower torso getting there and came up bleeding badly. Scout was beside him in an instant. He kept moving. He had to. The line was 2 soldiers wide at that point. He did not feel how bad the wound was until he stopped moving, and he did not stop moving until the line held and the Hurek pulled back to regroup. He sat down against the rock because his legs decided to without asking him, and Scout pressed against his right side, enormous and warm, and he could feel the dragon breathing, slower than it should have been, each breath a conscious effort. Dale put his hand against Scout's neck. Scout lowered its head against his shoulder. The coalition fleet broke through the orbital blockade 22 minutes later. The first ground forces reached the pass in 38 minutes. By then Dale was barely conscious. Scout was still on its feet. Still between him and the open pass. Still watching. Dale woke up 3 days later. The ceiling above him was white and flat and smelled of recycled air. A medical bay. He lay still for a while and listened to the quiet. There was no sound of fighting. There was no sound of Scout. He knew before anyone told him. A wreath does not survive the death of its bond by very much. The literature said 3 to 5 days at the outside. But the literature had always been wrong about Scout, consistently and in every direction, and what the medical staff told Dale, gently and with some difficulty, was that Scout had not lasted long past the moment the coalition forces arrived at the pass. It had waited. That was the word they used. The attending alien medic, a careful Jurathi woman named Sale, said it with something in her voice that Dale did not expect from a Jurathi speaking about a human's dragon. She said Scout had waited until the perimeter was secured, until Dale was loaded onto a medical carrier, until it knew the job was done. Then it had lain down. Dale looked at the ceiling for a long time after she left the room. He did not cry then. That came later, alone, when the bay was quiet and the lights were low and there was no one watching and no reason to be anything other than what he was, which was a man who had lost something that had chosen him specifically and held to that choice until the last possible moment. Captain Reyes came on the 4th day. She sat in the chair beside the bed and told him what had happened after the pass. Bryn's routing change had been investigated. It had not been an accident or a miscommunication. He had used his access to delay the fleet repositioning, citing a procedural flag that existed but had not applied to the situation he used it for. The investigation was ongoing. He had been relieved of his position pending the outcome. Coalition Command, embarrassed, had issued a formal commendation for the 14th. Dale listened to all of it and said, "Scout held the pass." "Yes," Reyes said. "Not me, Scout held it." Reyes was quiet for a moment. "The commendation covers the whole unit," she said, "but there will be a separate citation. For Scout specifically, Coalition Command approved it." She paused. Lord Sound's office sent a communication as well. "What did it say?" "That the dragon had honored the wreath tradition," she said. "That a bond proven in this manner is recognized, officially, as equal in standing to any noble house bond." She looked at him. "That is a significant statement from them." Dale nodded. He understood what it meant. He did not particularly care about it. When he was well enough to stand, he went to the place they had brought Scout. The body had been treated respectfully, which surprised him and which he registered without saying so. The alien medics had laid it out properly, the wings flat, the head raised on a folded piece of material, the scales cleaned of blood and dust. It looked, in the way that the dead sometimes look, simply like something at rest. Dale sat beside it for a long time. He did not say much. He was not a man for long speeches, and the dragon had never needed words from him anyway, had always read him from something deeper than language. He put his hand on the dark scales the same way he had when Scout was new and shaking and small enough to hold in both arms, and he stayed until he felt the cold in the room more than the warmth of memory. When he left, he took one scale, a small one from just behind the left jaw, where the scales had always been slightly lighter in color, more gold than green. He kept it in his jacket pocket. He did not explain to anyone who asked why he kept reaching for it, then stopping himself. There was a memorial, not grand, not formal. The soldiers from the 14th stood together. Several Jurathi soldiers from Von's unit came without being asked. Even some of the Jurathi from Oral's staff, the same people who had been most vocal about the impropriety of a human-bonded wreath, came and stood at the edge of the group and said nothing and stayed for the whole of it. Von stood beside Dale. He did not say anything useful or comforting. He said, in his own language, and then in coalition standards so Dale would understand, it was a worthy bond. That was a Jurathi thing to say, a formal recognition. It meant that the bond had been tested and had not broken. It meant that what Scout had given was not given cheaply. Dale carried that with him the same way he carried the scale. The war did not end quickly. These things never do. The 14th was rebuilt, resupplied, and returned to service 6 weeks after the Battle of the Pass. Dale went with them. He did not request a new posting or a quiet assignment or any of the things that would have been understandable and available to him. He went back to the frontier work because that was where Scout had gone with him, and walking away from it felt wrong in a way he did not try to explain. He was not a different man after. He was the same man, doing the same job, in the same careful way. But something about him had changed in the estimation of others, in both species, and in the way he moved through coalition spaces. He was not longer the human with the embarrassing dragon. He was something else. Nobody quite had a word for it. Even the Jurassic, who had words for everything, just used his name. The dragon Hatchling had protected his human until his very last breath. And the human had spent every breath since making sure that meant something.